squadron commanders were called navarchs and commanded 10 ships. Navarchs, like the centurions of the legions, were the senior officers on permanent tenure. If they wished, they could apply for transfer into the legions at the rank of centurion. The senior navarch in the fleet was known as the navarchus princeps, who functioned like the senior centurion of a legion, offering technical advice to the prefect when required. The ships were commanded by triarchs. Like the navarchs, they were promoted from the ranks and were responsible for the running of individual ships. However, their role did not correspond to that of a modern sea captain. They were in charge of the sailing of the ship, but in battle, the senior figure was actually the officer in charge of the ship's complement of marines. As far as the ships go, the most common class of vessel was the small patrol galley, usually termed a Liburnian. These were propelled by oars or sails and had a small complement of marines. In the same class was the bireme, somewhat larger and more capable of holding its own in battle. The larger warships, the triremes, quadremes, and quinquiremes, were something of a rarity by the age in which this book is set, relics of a bygone age of naval warfare. Chapter 1. The commander of the naval supply station at Epikos was having his morning meal when the optio in charge of the dawn watch made his report. A light drizzle, the first rain in months, had been falling since first light, and the optio's cloak was covered with droplets that looked like tiny beads of glass. "What is it, Septimus?" Triarch Philippus asked tersely, dipping a hunk of bread into a small bowl of garum sauce in front of him. It was his custom to walk his rounds of the small fort and then return to his quarters to have his breakfast, without interruption. "Beg to report a ship has been sighted, sir, heading along the coast towards us." "A ship, eh? Just happens to be passing along one of the busiest sea lanes in the Empire?" Philippus took a deep breath to cover his impatience. "And the marine on watch thinks that's unusual?" "It's a warship, sir, and it's making for the entrance to the bay." The optio ignored the sarcasm and continued to deliver his report in the same deadpan voice that he had used ever since the triarch had taken command of the outpost, nearly 2 years ago. At first, Philippus had been delighted at the promotion. Before, he had commanded a sleek Liburnian warship in the Alexandrian flotilla and had grown heartily sick of the stifling lack of opportunity that went with being a junior officer commanding a small vessel that rarely ventured out of the port's eastern harbour. The appointment to the small naval station at Epikos had given him independence, and at first Philippus had striven to make his supply station a model of efficiency. But as the months dragged on, there had been no sign of any excitement, and the men of the station had little to do beyond provisioning the warships or imperial packets that occasionally entered the small, low-lying harbour as they made their way along the coast of Egypt. The only other duty Philippus had to discharge was to send a regular patrol up the Nile Delta to remind the natives that they lived under the watchful gaze of their Roman masters. And so Philippus eked out his days, commanding a half-century of marines and as many sailors, together with an old bireme, the Anubis, that had once served in the fleet that Cleopatra had taken to support her lover, Mark Antony, in his war against Octavian. After Antony's defeat at Actium, the bireme had been absorbed into the Roman navy and served with the Alexandrian fleet before it was finally sent to end its days at Epikos, beached in front of the small mud-brick fort that overlooked the bay. It was a dismal posting, Philippus reflected. The coastline of the Nile Delta was low and featureless, and much of the bay was taken up by mangroves where crocodiles lurked, lying still like fallen palm logs as they waited for any prey to come close enough to be rushed. The triarch lived in hope of adventure. However, he mused, the nearest he would ever get to that this day was overseeing the loading of biscuit, water, and any supplies of cordage, sail, or spars onto the new arrival. Hardly worth disturbing his breakfast for. "A warship, eh?" Philippus bit off some bread and chewed. "Well, it's probably on..."